I think it was November, December last year. We were talking about, how we were going to do meetings for the rest of the year. And I felt really strongly we needed to do an AI discussion. And at that point, it was still kind of a novelty. I mean, I guess it still is, but it was this, kind of weird thing. But I'm like, no, I think 2023 is going to be the year of AI. And oh my God, I mean, so much has happened in that few months. I mean, we were starting to get worried that it was going to be done by the time we had this meeting. It's come and gone. It's moving so fast. So that's why I'm really glad we got this panel together, and we have a lot of really interesting and diverse experiences with AI with us here on the panel to talk about what we do and why we do it that way. We will try very hard to leave time for questions at the end. If you do have questions, in the meantime, you can put them in the chat. Jennifer will be helping watch that. And we'll try to get to it. But I have to say, there is no way on earth we're going to be able to cover everything having to do with AI in the next hour or so. I mean, it's too big. So the hope here is that everybody who's heard of it and wondered how it might be useful will get some sense of that. And everybody who is terrified of it when the robots are going to all take over, we can maybe talk about when that's going to happen in 2024 or whatever. And otherwise, we'll just kind of learn a lot. And that's why I was really excited to moderate this panel, because I'm just really curious about this. I've been playing with ChatGPT and Bing and Dolly and Night Cafe and all of these kind of things, dabbling with it, but nothing real terribly productive right now. Just playing. And I want to get beyond that. So let's introduce our panelists here. I think everybody's on now. So I'm going to start off with Dan, if you'd wave or say hi there. Dan Janal is here in Minneapolis, near me. A nonfiction author, book coach, developmental editor, and ghostwriter, and also has a publishing company, Pickleball Publishing Company. And Dan, I know, has used AI in developmental editing, among other things. So we'll come into that more. Derek Murphy here is joining us, as we talked about, from Taiwan right now, and part-time also in Portland, Oregon. So Derek is a book marketing consultant and designer, as well as being a dark fantasy author himself and editor. And I forgot to mention, Dan is also an author. Everybody's an author, so that's good. Then also here is where's on the little boxes? Oh, there he is, Michael Evans in Boston. Sci-fi and nonfiction author and CEO of Ream, along with Emilia Rose. There she is, a romance author and co-founder of Ream. And they're going to talk about, I think, also how Ream works or will work as a subscription platform, specifically for authors. So that's kind of the brief introduction. And I want everybody to say a little more about who they are and what they're doing and why they're here. But the thing to start off with is really AI means so many different things right now to so many people. It's a brand new technology. It's something that's been around for years. We've all used it in one form or been affected by it. If you've had, Netflix or something like that, offer suggestions for what you might want to watch next. You've been using AI already. So this is not a new thing, but what has really transformed is what happened in November when ChatGPT, the text chat AI was released, and it really started to make people aware of the fact that AI could be used to actually not just deal with lots of data, but actually generate new content. And that rightly scared a lot of people. So that's what we've been trying to figure out for the past few months. So I guess let's just kind of go through the group here, maybe in the same order that I introduced you, and just sort of give us a sense of what AI means to you in a sentence or two, I guess, of how you're using it and why you're using it. So we'll start with Dan. Let's start with you.
I don't know if I can limit it to just one sentence. I have so many case studies that I'd love to share, but I'll try to keep. Maybe AI can take what I'm about to say and then condense it.
There we go.
A couple of bullet points. But I find that it's wonderful for generating prompts for my clients, so they never have the blank page syndrome or writer's block. I also used it to improve clients' writing. And I'll give a case study about that when it's more appropriate, because you asked for a sentence, so I'll keep it brief. But it is the future. It is here, and it is helpful, and it's wonderful.
Perfect. Okay, Derek.
So I've been playing around with a lot of things. I just finished my last book in my first series, my first completed fantasy series. So I rewrote all the blurbs with ChatGPT-4. They're a lot better and more engaging. And then I redid all of my book covers with AI Midjourney, which is the best text to images. Book cover design with AI is a whole thing we can talk more about later. I generated a ton of images and then Photoshopped them all together. So none of my pictures on my cover is actually straight from AI. It's all Photoshop, but all the elements came from AI. That's kind of like a softer way into it, because some people, if they see like an AI cover, they're still pretty skeptical.
I'm just playing with the spotlighting there, so we're a little easier to see. So Michael, I don't know, Michael, Amelia, you guys have to decide who wants to go first.
You can go, Michael.
Okay, I'll go first. I mean, I just want to draw like my analogy for AI is like back when the computing revolution was beginning. I think Steve Jobs said something like he viewed computers like a bicycle for the mind. It may have not been Steve Jobs who said that, someone else, big computer person. And I think AI kind of is like the car, if we want to use that analogy. It takes what the computer is already doing and takes it to the next level. And we've seen this in a lot of different ways. I think the first and biggest way I use AI is the recommendation algorithms. It's probably where we've seen most of the innovation in artificial intelligence over the last decade. I've found a lot of readers using recommendation algorithms, specifically Facebook ads, Amazon ads. That's all powered through artificial intelligence. Now, when we talk about generative AI, generative artificial intelligence, which is certainly this latest tech boom that we're talking about, my projects I've been mainly focused on are making editing easier, specifically audio editing, and producing things in a serialized audio format, whether it's podcasts, and actually taking that audio and then making it into transcripts. So like very, very quickly. So I can talk very specifically about that. But yeah, in very short, in today's day and age, if anything has zeros and ones or can be done on a computer, generative AI is making that possible, just like the last revolution of AI made anything possible to surface in zeros and ones. Now it can create it, which is well, definitely uncomfortable, but also really, really fascinating opportunity.
I completely agree. For me, AI is pretty much a tool that I can use throughout my entire business. I've done translations, created chatbots, so like bringing my characters to life. I've used it to create like character images, pretty much a little bit. I've dabbled in almost all of it, or I've tried to. But yeah, that's me.
And by characters, you mean the characters of your novels?
Yes. Yeah.
Bring them to life.
Yeah, I could explain that a little bit more to me. So
Why don't you? Because that's fascinating and a little bit, I don't know, a little bit creepy or a little bit scary.
So for me, it's more like I use this a lot on Discord, which is like a social media sort of app where my fans hang out. And basically what they can do is I've prompted a bot. I've like created a bot that acts and talks like my character. So people will jump into the Discord and say, hey, I want to talk to Steven. And this like Steven bot will say something that my character would say in like something similar to how they would speak like within my book, if that makes sense.
And you've been using that for interacting with readers. Have you used that for writing? I just have to go right there. I mean, because this has always been, I think, one of the holy grails of authors is when they're able to really interact with their characters, they actually think of them as real people.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're saying this kind of is. You can actually ask him, what would you do in this situation?
Yeah, I haven't done that yet, but that is a really good idea. I might steal that.
And that's, I think it's fair to say that's something that 6 months ago was not even possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
yeah,
that kind of
it's gotten really good.
that kind of gets to my next question, because, you know, talking what we kind of alluded to at the beginning about how things have changed so quickly. So for each of you, what are you able to do now that 6 months you couldn't do, and perhaps even couldn't dream of doing, because of the AI tools you're using?
I
You
think
can
I
jump
can
in.
do
Yeah.
things faster now, not that I couldn't do things before. Although with marketing, it writes my marketing materials so much better than I ever could have, because I'm a former journalist, and, you know, I write the facts, ma'am. I don't write hype. So to write marketing copy is really boring. I write boring marketing copy rather. Now with AI, it's writing like really engaging back cover copy and ads and sales letters. So that's something I couldn't do before. But one case study, one of my clients right now is we're writing a business fable book, and one of the characters is talking in an off-site team building meeting, and one of the other characters is challenging him, saying, "I'm not going to do this; it's a waste of time." And he responded in his draft to me with something that sounded very corporate and boring, and something that no person would ever really say. So I challenged him on that, and I said, "What would you really say?" He said, "Well, I really do say something like that." And I couldn't believe it. I said, "Why don't we go into ChatGPT and say, what would you say at a team building meeting where one of the team people was challenging whether this was a waste of time? What would you say to get him on board and keep harmony within the group?" And faster than I could say that, it typed out a wonderful response of the feel, felt, found kind of principle that you would say. Now, could we have found that same kind of language or idea in a book called How to Handle Difficult People and Difficult Conversations? Yeah, it would have taken hours, but it did it in seconds. And we saw it, pasted it in, made a few changes so it would be in his voice. And I think that's one of the great things. Chat can, and the other AI programs that I work with, are great at creating these prompts that we probably could have figured out anyway, but it saves us all that time. Another one of my clients, I'll share this and I'll be quiet, is writing a book. She's a financial planner. She's writing a book about financial planning for women in the retirement ages. And she had, 15 chapters about, tax planning, estate planning, saving for your retirement, blah, 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 blah. We typed that into chat and said, what top, write titles for chapter outlines for, women in financial planning. And it came up with a couple we hadn't thought about, like, what do you do with your time? Relationships, hobbies, interests. It's like, oh, yeah, we should include the softer skills there, not just the money skills. What are you going to do with your time when you're retired? So I thought of something that we hadn't thought of. So I think it's really great, except when it's wrong. And I'm sure you're going to touch on the wrong stuff later. So I'll pass the baton to the next person.
Yeah, I'm just gonna agree. I think, at least for me, everything that I could do 6 months ago, I could do now, like vice versa. But you do a lot of things faster and a lot cheaper as well. So like with translations, 6 months ago or even a year ago, I could have hired a translator to translate one of my series, but going through the AI first made it like I could do it like within 5 minutes. The whole book was translated and it was crazy. I then got an editor and a proofreader to make sure everything was all good and they could correct it if they needed to. But it was a lot cheaper and a lot less time to get those books out there.
What did you use for that?
I used DeepL, but I heard that Bard is really good. And I think ChatGPT is getting up there as well.
I'm going to put that link in the chat. Do we mind if I just drop interesting links that people mention?
No, please do.
Okay.
And I'm pleased to see you're able to multitask better than I can.
Yeah, I'm good with the link dropping. What can I say? But for me, I think AI actually has allowed me to do some things that I would have never been personally able to do or personally able to afford to do. And I think that I think really helpful and hopeful thing as writers is that all these systems are based off prompts. In fact, there are now tech companies that are hiring 6-figure roles for people to be prompt engineers, which I use quotes around that because it's just so new, it doesn't even feel like a real thing, but it is. And these are people who are essentially prompting AI systems using natural language, which is text speak for words, the things that we write all day long. And then these systems can actually do things in return. So the really interesting thing is that although, yes, these systems can generate text, and we can talk more about how you can literally get these systems to generate stories and in a textual format for you, they also can do so much more than that. And I dropped some links in the chat. So text to video, this is coming online like right now. And it's wild. You can literally type in like girl on a bicycle, like licking ice cream. Like you could just imagine that, right? Picture that in your mind. The AI will do a version of that right then. And now that can be B-roll that's in a video that you then use text to speech. So you then write it just in words, and then the AI system transposes that into audio for you. So you now just using words created both audio and created both video. And I put the programs I put in the chat do allow you to do that. All of them are subscription based, and you could literally buy a subscription to all these for under $100 a month. And you'd only need one of them with Descriptor Podcast. So those are just two options. I've used both of them. I can vet all these and they're good. That's crazy. And then you can edit it using AI so that if you are speaking or there are mistakes in it, you can actually like Control F and edit your podcast like a Word doc. Like that's just wild to me. So it actually, for me, like we have an editor for our podcast now. We hired an editor. And now she gets to focus, instead of having to like make 100 different cuts in the podcast, each time there's an or each time there's a space, she can listen to the podcast, focus on the content. And we pay her the same amount that she would have otherwise gotten, but she can just make a much better podcast in that time. So it's a win-win for all parties. And that's what I think the interesting thing about it is that we can use our dollars and our actual brains to go so much farther with these technologies in different media formats. Now, writing is a whole other topic that I'm sure we'll dive into with AI writing. But
Do you have anything in there, Derek, you want to add in? The 6-month question?
Sure. The main thing I've noticed is just how fast the technology has gotten better, both for the art stuff and also for the writing stuff. It was a novelty last year, even in November, where like, wow, this might actually be good. And then, you know, by the time people are still discussing like, what is AI? Will it be useful for authors? It's already much better than they expected. It's already gotten too good. I thought I was ahead like 3 months ago, and now I'm behind because it's way better. Like I thought I'd be able to use it at the end of the year. It's already too useful right now that it makes me obsolete as a writer, as a book cover designer. But not very many authors are using any of the tools yet. So we still sort of have an opportunity to get ahead. Real quick, like specifically with the art stuff, Midjourney 4 was out until Midjourney 5 came out. And I made some cool fantasy art stuff, but I couldn't get like a perfect book cover image previously. Now I can. I couldn't get like a romance Regency couple kissing in a pastoral field. Now I can, with almost near perfect facial features and fingers, like book cover ready art that I don't have to polish in Photoshop. The opportunity is that these are like, because especially for historical stuff, there are no photos of Regency people kissing in a field in 1812. So you have bad cosplay, like modern cosplay photography. I can make images that look better than anybody's seen online in history ever. And if I have those images to promote my Regency romance or my vampire romance or whatever, you know, just having those high quality images is a huge marketing boon, because, you know, social media especially is a really visual medium. If I put up a picture nobody's ever seen before, they'll slow down for the picture, and then I can give them my marketing message. With the writing side, the writing quality was like, it could kind of do the job 2 or 3 months ago. Now it can write like better, not better than I can write, but it can write at my best self quality all the time. So instead of writing a rough draft and then spending a year polishing it up and editing it, I can get a lot closer to a final draft in a lot less time. I can also train it on my own writing. What I'm looking forward to right now, it's limited to, I think, like 2,000 or 3,000 words, but very soon it's going to be 20,000 words. I'm looking forward to the point where I can put in book 1 of a series and have it write book 2 in my voice, only being trained on my own writing. And there's actually some tools right now that you can download to your computer and train on your own data set. So I could train it on my backlist and it would learn how to write in my voice that I've, written like 20 novels by myself. That was a lot of hard work. I'm okay not doing all of that hard work anymore. If I can, now that I feel like I know what I'm doing, if I can skip a lot of that hard work and put out more books and finish my series, I'm happy to let the robots take over the mundane, boring processes that I tend to avoid and procrastinate anyway, because like, sure, I could do it, but I won't. And so it takes me a lot of time. Not only is it pretty good, but I think it'll help me to get work done without the avoidance.
As you were describing that, Derek, I'm envisioning a time in the future when you're like, I can't wait till the the fifth book in my series comes out. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. The really cool thing was there was a comic like 100 years ago about AI art that said basically, I think it was like in 1921, there was a comic about how, the AI art machine is going to be around in 2021, which nailed it pretty on the mark, 100 years previously. But also there's a Roald Dahl short story about an AI writing machine, which is really like a sad, tragic dystopia. But it's a really fascinating, like writers have been talking about AI art for hundreds of years. It's really interesting to see that like we are living in these unprecedented times and we have to be the ones who figure out what to do with all of it.
Well, I think that's a good segue to where I kind of want to take the conversation a little bit here, and that being the dystopian future kind of view. This is something I think we've all seen, we've all talked about, we've all heard about, contemplated, stayed up at night, fearing over things like that. I guess to kind of ease into talking about that, one question would be for again, any of you here, we've talked about a lot of things, covers, images, marketing images, marketing copy, actual books, things like that. Does the type of content, or I guess the way it will be used, does that really matter from an ethics standpoint for AI creation? And this is, an example might be, let's say I ask, ChatGPT or one of the other, chat engines, I need, for example, what would be 5 good questions to ask a panel of publishing experts on AI? Okay. Now, nobody's going to get bent out of shape if that's copied from somewhere or if that's not strictly original. It's a good place to start things. Versus, this is now a novel that I put out. I've said it's my own work. To Derek's point, it's based on my own style, but I didn't actually write a single word of it. Sliding scale, ethics. How do people feel about this? Are there points that are too far?
What's interesting is I think one of the questions, and if I'm jumping the gun on this, like, are we going to get to the GMO label thing? Is that coming? Because then I won't say what I'm about to say.
Well, go ahead and say it.
Okay. Well, I would say that it's very interesting in terms of like, my mind thinks like, where do we draw the line? What's the boundary work along these things in the sense of what is AI and not? And more importantly, who is drawing that line? Like, who do we give the power to do that and to say that? So what I mean by that is, we all can have our own personal ethics. And I encourage that. I don't think there's like a sort of like objective right or wrong way to feel about any of these things or to use these things. But that's a very, extreme, like libertarian approach. And we all know that our world and our society has norms, whether regulation or not steps in. There's platform guidelines, there's content guidelines, and sometimes content rules that are going to evolve. There's copyright law that will evolve, and that law will draw a line somewhere in the sand. And I am very nervous about how that goes, because I think that we can get really, really caught up in, these extremes of either end of, this thing that was completely like, the machines taking over, or the opposite extreme of like, the machines are nowhere. and miss some beauty in between in the gray area. And I definitely don't like really even know what we should do, but I know for myself, I really want to think about like, who are we empowering and who's going to win in this AI future? And whether AI writes the novels, writes 5 of the words, or writes none of the words, like, who are we looking to empower? And I think the real worrying trend in me, and I think it's a trend we could probably all feel is a bit worrying, is who has won typically and who might continue to win in terms of, big corporations, technology conglomerates. I would like to see artists be empowered by this. And I don't know exactly the path to that empowerment, but I do know that the first step in empowering yourself is taking a step forward, right? And is being able to learn and educate yourself and band together. So I don't want us all as a community of authors to divide on like AI on one side, no AI on the other side, and us not really work together to actually like fight as a group of storytellers who have, I think, a really shared mission and purpose of wanting to create awesome experiences for our readers.
I like to write. I don't need AI to write my characters or my stories or whatever. So I don't want AI to say, here's the latest book by Ernest Hemingway, if only he were alive. I think that's kind of scary. But again, for me, just having the prompts or having it look over something and what did I miss? What could I have said better? Is this the way an 18-year-old girl would have responded to this situation that I, as a 60-year-old man, wouldn't know in today's vernacular? Derek's example of pictures from the Regency period, which I never even heard of, so good for you. To correct what we have, using Grammarly. Is Grammarly AI? Yeah, Grammarly will suggest, hey, if you could rewrite this sentence this way, and it makes more sense. I said, it's right. This is clearer. So it could be a great tool. Someone wrote in chat that said, wouldn't it be great that AI can take care of the thousands of normal grammatical mistakes that it could take? That's great. Someone else in chat said, isn't this whole thing disingenuous? You're really not the writer anymore. She's right in certain respects. Now, do I care if I write my marketing copy or not? Hell no. Do I care if I write my books? I've written 12 books, 6 for Wiley, 6 I've self-published, and I've ghostwritten books for doctors and army generals and such. Who knows what the answers are? But one thing that scares me is the facts. Even without AI, we have people on the left and people on the right arguing over what is a fact. And if we ask AI to say, show me 5 reasons to do X, it very well could come up with something wrong. I asked AI to write back cover copy for one of my clients' books that we were still in the midst of writing. And it came up with a wonderful back cover copy of about 400 words or so, including a beautiful, beautiful quote. The trouble is, they attributed the quote to Susie Orman. Susie Orman never read the book. It just plopped her name in the middle of a glowing quote. That's scary. So there are a million questions, and as Paul said, we're not going to be able to answer any in the whole realm of things, but man, this is a debate to have.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, Dan, because there are things that people are doing or will be doing with AI that we haven't even contemplated yet. Yeah, the idea of auto-generating a fake back cover quote and attributing it to someone who it maybe kind of sounds like them, because we're talking AI, but who maybe is not alive or certainly did not read the book, and certainly didn't write the quote. And I think we would all agree that would be an unethical use of AI and should be flagged somehow. But what about the folks who maybe aren't quite as upstanding citizens as all of us here that think, if I had that quote on my book, I'd probably sell some more copies. And yeah, I might get sued, but by then I'll move on to the next thing. Not that there is anybody that unscrupulous out there in the publishing world, but if there were. Okay, now we all look very scared.
Yeah. That takes your breath away, doesn't it? Thank you, Paul. Because there are unscrupulous people out there. Just look at crypto. Yeah, scary, very scary. I'm going to be quiet. You guys talk.
I had this one discussion a few years ago. I tried to partner up with a bunch of my author friends to write together under a pen name. And it didn't really work out because some of us were plotters and some of us were pantsers. So we had a discussion or like an argument. The group fell apart because some of us thought the story was the most important part, like the outline, the plan, the story structure. That's what we're good at, or like the editing. So we thought we'll do the outline and the editing. Somebody else can write the content. And those other writers, they thought that the writing the content was the only important part. So if you're like a solo author, you're either writing a quick rough draft and then hiring a book coach, hiring someone to give you a developmental edit, to do a structural edit, all these other pieces, but you still wrote the book. You just wrote like the first draft story idea. You don't credit your editors. And then on the flip side, you could be doing the other skills where maybe I'm just doing the outlining thing, but I'm hiring a ghostwriter or I have a co-writer who's filling in some of the content. So the question is like, where's the value come from? The actual writing the words down or creating the story and having the idea? I don't think that's a clear issue. And that we've already, for quite a while been not doing 100% of the work on our book, whether it's the book cover or the marketing copy or whatever. So using AI instead of a coworker or instead of hiring someone to do those other pieces for you, I don't feel like is such a big stretch to replace those parts that you're already not doing. I don't think we should have to be responsible to be the best at every single skill involved in publishing a book, because there's a lot of pieces and we're all going to have our natural gifts and talents. I think we should focus on the things we're really good at and then not do the things, not even the things that we're not good at, but the things that don't bring us joy, that we procrastinate with. Like there's a lot of things I know I could just do myself, but I don't, so I won't do anything for months. Those are the things I want to offload really quickly so I can actually get something done. I think AI kind of helps with some of that.
Yeah, I agree. I actually have like a personal story that kind of relates to that. So most of the projects I use AI for aren't specifically writing, but I've used AI to help me write one of my most recent books. It's not like released yet, but I used it more as like a co-author who can like help me form ideas. And so like kind of like a backstory, I started as a paranormal romance author and that's all I would write. And that's all my fans really want. So they want like werewolves and romance. And for the longest time, I like loved doing that. But as time went on, it was harder and harder for me to write those kind of stories. But I like deep down in my core, I love those stories so much and I want to produce more of those stories. I just didn't have it in me. And so I put my idea, like I started writing in pseudo write and I would write the first part of my chapter and I didn't know where it was going. So I'd just be like, help me write the next line. And it would write the next like 2 or 3 sentences. And I'd be like, oh, okay. So I have inspiration now. I know where this chapter is going. And I'm going to continue it based off what the AI gave me. So it's not for me. And I will go back and revise what the AI said to make it more in my voice. But for me, I'm not like telling the AI to write the entire book for me, or even like the entire chapter. It's just like using the AI as a tool to kind of figure out your ideas and get kind of inspiration from it.
And Emilia, you then acknowledge all the great work that the AI has done for you in your acknowledgements page, right?
Yes, but I haven't released this one yet.
I mean, that kind of gets to that point. I saw this in the chat is, that acknowledgement question. And that's absolutely right. If we're talking a ghostwriter, generally speaking, a ghostwriter is never named in the book, or maybe is named as, helping to create the story or something like that in the acknowledgement, something that is, somewhat obtuse, but most people in the industry know what it really means. But yeah, there's a whole army of people that may be helping that don't get named. Yeah. And I'm thankful that, as a designer, generally speaking, designer contracts, designer gets named on the copyright page, which is cool. But, you watch a movie, say, something that comes out of Hollywood, there's 15 minutes of names scrolling by, people, the caterer, for Pete's sake, that helped on the set, things like that, and it's, it's interesting to me that publishing doesn't do that. We don't acknowledge all of the people involved in the creation of a book, never have. But perhaps now that some of those people may not actually be people, maybe people are going to be more interested in doing that. I don't know. But then, yeah, it's a question. If we're filling in the gaps with an AI system, should we say which one it is? Should we say, what version? Does it matter?
Oh,
I 100% agree. We should acknowledge everyone like they do on the back of a movie or television program. I mean, it's an opportunity to say thank you. It doesn't cost us anything, and it really helps them a lot. Maybe.
Well, as Kelly said in the chat, it did cost. It was very hard-won contract negotiations, and as we all know, most people in publishing do not have an upper hand in most of the contract negotiations. Especially authors who please publish me, and that's enough.
A lot of changes to those credits too. I was recently reading a book where some guy started a software company to try and make it easier to update those credits because it's so expensive to constantly go back and update those end credits for movies. So I think we actually have it easier in publishing, and as indie authors, if for those of us who are indie authors who are listening, I think there's an opportunity to do that. And for those of you who run small presses, I think that that could be a great way to reward the people you work with. So when it comes to AI, it's interesting because, I'm all about uplifting people, not really some like AI bot, like personally. So disclosing that you're using it is a whole other conversation. But I would, in an ideal world, love to know some of the works that were influenced in that AI, what that AI was kind of reading on. Of course, right now, it's just a mess of everything. But if there was a possibility to like click a link and be like, oh, this was like a mesh of these 100 works together that were the most highly influenced in the outputs in this work, right? I mean, we don't even do that right now. And when we write books as authors, like all the time, like me personally, I'll riff an idea off this movie, riff an idea off this book, and do all these different things, combine it just in my mind into this story. And, it's not like usually, even though these like creative people like inspired me, like I wouldn't be able to write this without them. We don't typically give credit to those stories. I would love if there was a way with these AI tools, for those who do choose to use them, that we're actually uplifting the humans who put the labor into making that AI possible, right? Because AI is really generating things that humans have done. It's not just coming from thin air. But that's like not really feasible today. So today, I mean, heck, it's tricky. I think give credit to the people. And if it's an AI program that you feel like you want to disclose, I think for fellow writers who are reading your books, I'm not for putting it on the cover. I don't think you need to like display, like I used pseudo writer ChatGPT for this paragraph. Whereas if it's narrated, I think there is a good case for, saying this isn't the actual narrated voice. Cause I think the reader at this stage, right, there's a noticeable difference still. And I think it's fair. Like if the reader has a relationship with the narrator, and I get attached to narrators all the time, if it's not literally them who read that book, I feel like they have a right to know. Just from the reader perspective, I don't know, I could be wrong.
I'm reminded of one of our hometown heroes here in Minnesota, Bob Dylan, recently released a book in 2 different editions. And one of them included an actual signed, Bob Dylan signed a signature page in there. And it turned out he did sign him, but he didn't. He used a machine that mimicked his signature. So he didn't have to actually sign the 5,000 copies that the publisher sold. And so it was his signature. And it was signed by a pen. It just wasn't his hand holding the pen. And people, it was an outrage, people had to return books, the publisher ate a lot about that. And I'm sure he's not going to sign those thousands of copies ever. I mean, that's a lot of work. But it's an interesting question because it kind of gets to the heart of exactly the same thing. I mean, that literally was a machine doing something for him that was being passed off as actually him. And so, yeah, that maybe kind of falls into that ethics trap. But yeah, I mean, when it's all ones and zeros, as we talked about earlier, it's a lot harder to draw that line.
Well, that's where the transparency comes in that you mentioned at the outside of this meeting. If I disclose to my clients that I re-edited their work and added dialogue, but I actually took it from Chat GPT or some other program. And if I disclose it to them, it's like, well, okay, great. I mean, if a lawyer draws up a will for me and they press a button on that sort of is AI for lawyers, and it took them 5 minutes and they charged me 3 hours of billable time because that's what they used to charge to draw up a will. Is that ethical? I mean, it raises all sorts of questions for everything. So where do you?
Well, I
draw the
want to
line?
get into the ethics of what lawyers charge, because that is definitely a deep hole to go down.
Yeah, but if a narrator, take that perfect example there. If someone reads the book and it's not you, is that ethical? Of course it is, because it's being done all the time. If James Patterson has a writing factory where he basically is an idea factory, he creates ideas and just outlines the book and then hires people that he has vetted to write the actual book. He goes on to write the next outline and he comes up with 50, 60, 100 books a year that way. I mean, I don't think it's unethical. I don't know where you draw the line. And so we talk about AI coming into it. Smarter minds than I will figure that out, or laws, but it's being done right now without machines. It's being done by human beings.
No, that's very true. I mean, you think about the artist studio system dating back, pre-Renaissance time. Yeah, the artist was signing the works, but generally it was the apprentices or the journeymen that were creating most of that effort.
Sure.
Ansel Adams, I know, was the same thing. I mean, he had a factory of people that were generating original photographs that were Ansel Adams photographs. They were his negatives. He took the photos, absolutely. But as anybody who follows photographic art knows, I mean, half the art is in the developing and creating of the print. Were those strictly speaking his? Well, they were under his supervision. Certainly, he signed off on them. He approved them. Did he jiggle the tanks and everything like that? Well, he's kind of an important guy to be jiggling tanks and stuff. And the same thing comes up, I think, even nowadays. Again, like to your point, Dan, non-AI. If I'm let's say I'm art directing a cover and I hire an illustrator and I say, okay, this is what I want the cover to look like. I wanted this kind of character. I want these colors. I want this sort of layout. And they create it. So the question is, who created that cover? Did I, because I art directed it, or did the illustrator? Right now we have pretty clear rules. The illustrator gets the illustration credit. The art director, nobody talks about them. But this now changes a bit.
Mommy, this looks so good.
In the AI world, because now we're all art directors, and can create anything we want conceivably. And do we give credit or not? It's a fun problem in the conceptual sense until you're faced with it. Literally, what do I put on the copyright page of this book that I'm about to publish?
It also sort of makes you wonder if you go into Chat GPT and say, write me a book about pickleball strategies. And it creates a 20,000 word book, and someone else goes in to Chat GPT and says, write me a book about pickleball strategies. That's 20,000 words. Does it create the same thing? Would the same question, with the same prompt, reveal the exact same answer, and you turn that into a book? Who owns the copyright? First person there, or Open Systems, or whoever owns ChatGPT? I don't know.
In that case, I know it does not generate the same thing. In fact, you can regenerate responses. If you gave it the same seed, the randomizing seed, and the same prompt, it would generate exactly the same text. But the seed is randomized. In the case of like ChatGPT, it's generally hidden. In the case of image generators, you do have control over the seed. So you could actually regenerate an image if you knew the seed, which kind of, as I say that now, it sounds an awful lot like, tokens when we're talking about Bitcoin tokens and things like that. It's not really anything other than a serial number, really, when you get down to it. But that gets into the detail of the technology. But where was I going with this? Oh, the one thing I wanted to ask, just kind of to kind of pivot on this, is it's a curiosity, and I think we've all probably experienced this. When you try out AI, ChatGPT or Bing or something like that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first thing I try to do is break it. I want to see it fail. I want to see it burn. I want to see it do something so god awful that I'm like, yeah, this thing is not ready. Is that just me, or is everybody kind of that's your first thing you put in?
I'm kind of the opposite. I want to see it succeed, but for me, most times it fails at first.
Anybody else want to admit?
As kind of a side
I think
comment,
it's kind
I
of
was
weird,
just gonna,
Paul. I like the way you think.
I think a lot of people, when they start out, they'll just put a basic, simple prompt to try things out, and then the results aren't very good. So they'll say AI is not ready for the prime time because the results are not good enough. It takes quite a bit of prompting to kind of train the AI to get what you want. And then it can have really, really good results if you're prompting it the right way, but that takes more time and experimentation. One of the things that changes really quickly is with Midjourney and with ChatGPT-3, like 3 months ago, you used to have to have very long, detailed prompts with tons of stuff. It took a lot of experimentation to get decent results. And with the newer versions, that's not the case anymore. You can have very, very simple one-sentence prompts that have much better results because the robots are learning and getting feedback. Now that they've got, I think, like 200 million people using it daily with ChatGPT-4, it's training itself very, very quickly. So even, if it continues in the trajectory that it's already been on for the last 3 months, then in 6 months, it'll be like 10 times better than it is right now. So the question isn't even, is it scary that the technology is almost as good as humans right now? Because it definitely will be better than our best creative content in 10 months. That's when it's, right now we're in the present where it hasn't happened yet, but, looking at where it's headed, even just this year, it is going to get to the point where anybody without any skills can produce really high quality content. So the really dangerous thing is that they're not really tools for skilled users to take advantage of. They're tools that unskilled users will be able to produce better results, and they won't have to hire the skilled users anymore, which is really scary for everybody who works in any industry, basically, because it replaces the skill level. But the flip side of that is that we are going to start seeing a lot of new content from minority voices that have never really had the opportunity, because investing in a skill, going to university, having the time to spend a couple decades getting good at something and building a business around it, that's not an opportunity that everybody has. So even, the voices that get published, the voices that have the time to write books, that's going to change when people who have ideas no longer have to put in 20 years to get good enough to tell those stories. It opens up a lot of stuff, even for fantasy art. A lot of people are freaking out about the new Little Mermaid because it's not what they remember. But also, like, all fantasy art is primarily white fairies and white vampires and white everything, because the people who have funded the creative projects have been looking for a certain type of art to sell the kind of books that are getting published. Now people can just make anything without having to hire a $1,000 illustrator, and we can start to see a lot more diversity in fantasy art, but also, books, publishing, all kinds of creative content. I think that's not necessarily a step in the wrong direction. It's just, those are two extremes that are going to have to balance it out.
I love what you just said. And there's another interesting, interesting part of this, because I think what you said is a really, really great point. And I really, do believe that could be a very great thing that comes from this, but it's obviously these are all speculations, but I think we're already starting to see this happen in many ways. But then we've probably also, and many of you have probably seen this at the same time, that these same, large language models that have been built up to this point, many of them are biased, where, if you ask, for instance, DALL-E 2 to produce an image of a Black woman, it does not look as good as an image of a white woman. And it's not because there aren't, plenty of beautiful Black woman, and it's nothing about that. It's because the images that exist online that it's pulling from, a lot of them contain racist depictions. A lot of them contain a lot of things that maybe are really, really, really bad. So it's an aggregate. Even when you ask it to create beautiful X, it might not create it as beautiful as someone else. And of course, all these things are subjective, right? So someone might look at two images and still think the other one's better, but this has been widely reported. So it's interesting, but I still think that, you know, greater access and greater inclusion can be something that is possible, but it's also something that we all have to continue to work towards as an industry as well, right? Like, you know, we talk about the AI at the end of the day, but like if an AI is just creating something for another AI, and it's just AIs talking back and forth, then it really does mean nothing. Like that's about the most pointless thing I could ever think of. So this industry.
But isn't that kind of what we have now from a marketing standpoint? I mean, right, you use an AI to help write your website so that Google helps searches it better and gives you a better ranking.
That isn't true though. At the end of the day, there's always a person. There's always a person, always. And if there wasn't a person there experiencing that content, connecting with that, there would be no reason to do any of this with. And I still think that, you know, we can't underestimate the power of community and of human relationships in all of this, because as much as we love stories because they help us navigate our social world, because they help us navigate a world full of people. So I don't think the people are going to become any less important, even if some of the things we do might be disrupted. And that worries me. So I do want to just say, I think there's still, with all these things about the technology doing X and Y and Z, we as people still, I think, are the agents here at the end of the day, who get to decide what stories are surfaced, what stories we care about, what stories we talk about, and what kind of publishing industry we want to be in. AI doesn't have to take over, right? We are still in control because we are the readers at the end of the day. We are the readers too.
Yeah. There's a famous saying, of course, garbage in, garbage out. And let me address both those sides. Prompts are really cool. If you don't know what to type in, you don't know all the things that it can do. I just saw a video where someone said, create a photograph using a Canon ES SLR at 5 o'clock at night, Central Time, of and then whatever the picture was, you know, two people having a picnic. It's like, oh my God, they can mimic what a Canon camera looks like. I wouldn't even think to ask for something like that. So when I see some of these prompts that are being created of like, create something in my voice, and one of the coaches whose seminar I attended had this, you know, 7-line thing about take this content and analyze it for voice, structure, narration, tone, grammar, whatever. And then it knew how to create in her voice. It was like, oh my God, I would never think of doing that. It's brilliant that there are people who think that way. And I think that's wonderful. On the garbage outside of things, whatever AI creates, it's up to us. Well, I'm a consultant as well. And, you know, I do have 30 years of experience doing what I do, and I can see if something is bullshit. If, you know, AI creates a lot of garbage, and say, I'm sure you as writers as well can say, this character would never say that. That werewolf would never do that. This would never fly on page 3. It might fly on page 30, but it's way too soon to bring it in here. And that's where our own expertise can supersede something that AI can do. Will the next generation of AI supersede that? I don't know, but I still think there's that human element. And I love what Michael said about the stories we tell and the community that we create. There's still a need for storytellers out there and for, you know, creating this kind of community so we all have better lives.
So we're getting close to what would be 8 o'clock here in Central Time. Top of the hour, whatever time zone you happen to be in. So I want to kind of see if Jennifer's been kind of watching the chat here. Is there anything we haven't covered yet? Silly question. Is there anything up in the chat though that we should talk about?
Yeah, so 2 people had questions along the lines of, what about my art and what about my narration voice? Like they're worried about their writing style being absorbed into the Borg. I don't know who said that. They said they don't want their writing style to be absorbed into the Borg. Do you have any comment on that?
Borg? What's a Borg? Sorry.
The Borg, like.
That's a Star Trek reference.
Well,
The
right.
collective mind, the group thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very, very valid concern. One thing is that most, if not, I mean, I'm sure there's AI models that people are training in hiding that are trained on copyright content, but something like ChatGPT-4 and a lot of like the big institutional language models that people are kind of using today, and that also people are building on top of, aren't using data sets trained on copyrighted books. So that's one thing. Now, there's so much fan fiction online and so much derivatives and ripped off things that, that's something that they say, and, we can all, take things sometimes with a maybe grain of salt at times. But, it's interesting because I know this sounds weird, but like these things are literally designed as neural networks. And I'm not going to really get into any of the math behind machine learning and then deep learning and then, artificial intelligence that we now have, but they are designed as multi-layer neural networks that are making multiple inferences on top of existing data to generate new data. Now, what does that mean? I use the word neural, right? They're kind of designed after our brain, which is wild to think. But there's this really, really burgeoning field of computational neuroscience that's like at the cutting edge of making this possible, designing basically these systems to think like the brain. Ted Chiang, very famous science fiction author. Many of you probably know his short story collection, published now 20 years ago, called Exhalation. In that, I may have said the wrong short story collection. Yes, he's had a few famous ones. Regardless, the one that was published 20 years ago, that one, he has a short story that's about an AI system. And you know what he said about the AI system? That was the travesty. It wasn't robots taking over, but actually us as humans kind of like subjecting the AI as just another form of a mouse or another form of a cow. It becomes another sort of living entity that we have just subjugated to our desires. And that, that actually is the dystopia, which is a really weird flip on it, but using it that way, if we think of AI as this sort of other being out there, which is really weird, I know, but it's just this other being out there, I would posit the question, how much different is it having this really is a question. If you have your book and a reader reads your book and then decides to write a book inspired off of it, you know what I mean? Your book's out in the Borg now and other people might write things because of it and might write things similar and follow similar tropes and characters. I'm curious what the difference is there.
I was going to say the same exact thing. Like, everyone has learned, like, I'm not saying anything is good or bad or right or wrong, but everybody has learned how to write from somebody else. And we've grown up reading stories and taking a little bit of how stories are created from people and making it our own. And so what Michael is, I love your question, because like any reader, any other writer can read your book and be like, wow, I really loved what she did there. I'm going to add that to my story. And it might not be like word from word, but I'm going to add that specific idea or how she did, I don't know, alliteration or whatever it is. Like, people already are doing that. And the question is like, how is that different? How are people using it different from an AI using it?
Well, and we certainly hope it's not word for word, because that would be copyright infringement.
Yeah.
But that is one thing that's very clear. You cannot copyright a style. Although many people think you can, and some people think you ought to, both in art and in writing, you cannot copyright a style. But it's also different to say that, I think at least, I've learned from, great authors in the past, and I've created my own version of what I think is manifest from them, versus saying literally in a chat robot, write as if you were Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
Which I guess a person could do also, you're right, but maybe it's not different then.
There's actually a great article on Every.2 about this writer, Dan Shipper, who was trying to basically get an AI to emulate one of his favorite writers. And he was doing it to kind of like inspire his own writing and was being reflexive about the ethical issues. But what's kind of incredible about these technologies at the current point is that they continue to perform better the more specific they are, as Derek was mentioning. So when you actually say to write in the style of, let's say, Stephen King, it'll actually do it really well. Like that's like its strongest suit is ripping off the style or riffing off whatever verb fits you're feeling about this. It's actually the best at that. That's its strongest moments.
Because it doesn't
one
need to be original.
thing I wanted to
That's a good point.
mention that I don't think we said earlier about the copyrights was that we can't copyright AI written content unless we've done a lot of human revision. So it's a little different with the writing, but probably you'd edit it pretty heavily, even if you had the GPT-4 write it or whatever. And most authors don't copyright their books anyway. It's not necessarily a requirement, and you don't have to have copyrighted material to publish on Amazon. Amazon and book publishers don't require it either. It's mostly a problem with like book cover design when you're making images in Midjourney. Technically, you can't copyright that art, which means you don't own that art and anybody else could use the same image to make another book cover. However, like I use Midjourney on a private server, nobody else can see it anyway, and then I'll put my text on it in Photoshop, so nobody else has access to that image. They could make something pretty similar in Midjourney if they were using the same prompts, which is sort of the scary part. Like I want to redo all my covers quickly before everybody else is using AI in their covers, because I want my covers to be the best covers on Amazon for, 3 months at least, before everybody else is doing it. But anyway, it's a thing to know that you can't copyright your AI content, but it's not actually a significant challenge to using it.
And just to be clear, anything you write is copywritten just by virtue of having written it, even if you don't file a copyright. But
Mhm.
defending it would require filing it.
Right.
Could you tell us more about Midjourney? I know you've mentioned it 2 or 3 times, and I'm curious.
Midjourney
Is it expensive?
I don't know. I think it's like $20 a month or something. I think I pay 60 because I use it all the time. I think there's a free version that you can try out. Basically, it's like DALL-E 2 or all the other text to images, but it's so much better because so many more people are using it. They kind of like a lot of other companies had similar technology, but they were afraid of it, so they didn't do anything with it. And Midjourney just put it out there. A lot of people were using it, so it got better really quickly, and now it's way ahead of anything else. So it's still, it's still messy. But the funny thing is, like, in all the Facebook groups, like architecture or cakes or whatever, cats even, people will dump a bunch of photos, and they're amazing pictures of an apartment or a cake or whatever the thing is. And most regular people don't know that this is AI art. They just think these are the best pictures I've ever seen in my life, and they get a ton of likes and comments. I think for normal readers and normal consumers, they're not really concerned with the AI stuff, especially for the visual stuff. Like if they see it and it looks good, it's going to be more effective than, hiring someone who knows Photoshop or hiring an illustrator or whatever. There's a huge, philosophical conversation about the usage of it and creativity, but at a very basic level, humans respond to the images because they look better. They're impressive pictures. That's an interesting state to be in. So the people who are using Midjourney images, especially for like Facebook ads, I'm going to start a lot of Facebook ads with Midjourney images because I've got pictures that nobody has seen before of vampires and werewolves or whatever. That's better than, famous classic illustrations. It's just really, really good stuff. So by sharing that and by being one of the first people to share that kind of content, I might even use it for like stock photos. Like on my website, I can say stock photos of fairies or vampires or whatever, and that'll show up and rank and get a lot of shares and traction. So it can be valuable content, even if I'm giving it away for free, just to get traffic to my site to promote my books.
Do you add anything to the artwork that Midjourney creates?
If I'm using it for a book cover, I still would so far, because I don't think it's quite perfect. I might need to fix some details. And like I just redid my whole series, but I made like 1,000 images and then I pieced them all together in insane detail. It took me like 20 hours per cover. But I don't think I'll have to do that in the future. I think in another 6 months, anybody can just make a picture that's as good as the ones that I've got right now and add some text to it. The typography is a little bit different because typography for book cover design, choosing the right fonts for the genre, that's a whole thing that takes some expertise to learn. However, there are book cover templates where you can just, here's 100 book cover templates for young adult fantasy, pick one of those and put your artwork in, and it's as good as, a $500 cover. That's something that's available. So on the one hand, it's great for authors because it lowers the barriers to publishing and it makes it more accessible. But for everybody who's built, a book cover design business, it's terrible for them, just like it's terrible for every business that makes things.
Yeah, I was wondering, you think about AI, but there are a million templates out there for writing, for marketing, for, fill in the blanks of anything, and as well as art. And you just think like, wow, AI is just the next iteration of templates that smart people have put together and put out online for other people to use.
Can I interrupt again? Because I think a lot of people who are new to this field or want to use it are concerned about, well, where do we begin? I'm curious what the other ones here, for writing stuff, which tools would you recommend that we, because you have to pay something each month for these things. And there's so many, it's really hard to know where to begin. Like somebody asked, well, which is the best one for doing text editing and stuff like that? So can you talk about what you use and what you'd recommend a little bit?
Well, I think if you're going to be writing fiction, the one that has the feature set that's most designed for writing fiction, and even they have tutorials on it that are designed, again, specifically like for fiction storytelling, is Sudowrite. Now, if you're nonfiction, if you're not writing fiction, Sudowrite might not be the best approach for you. In fact, for nonfiction, I think generative AI can be very helpful for other parts of the writing process. But because of the sometimes hallucinations or inaccuracies of AI, I will say I would refrain from like full on recommending a specific system besides the foundational language model that Sudowrite's built on, which is GPT-4. And ChatGPT is, I think, $20 a month to get ChatGPT Plus. And you can do basically for your text needs, that can cover it. Now, for people who are asking about editing, there's really no good solution to just plug your book in, one click, and it comes out with like your proofread or developmental edit done. Now, there's two options that I've heard of. So one was already mentioned, prorating AI. Another one is actually author.ai. I'm going to put the link in the chat. JD Lassica and Alessandra Tor are co-founders of it. That one does a developmental edit of your books. It's not cheap. I think it's like $50 or $60 per books, which actually, okay, it is cheap, but it's not like you can't try it out for free. So there's no free trial. You just got to go for it. But I've never used it myself, but I've heard good things about it in the community. So at least when it comes to writing, those are the ones I'd recommend starting with. It's definitely not worth, trying 30 or 40 different tools, but other people might have other recommendations. Actually, for copywriting, I recommend copy.ai or Jasper if you're doing that. But if I'm being honest, I think ChatGPT is better than those from my experience.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, if I can, ChatGPT, it had 3.5 and ChatGPT is GPT-4, which is the best, most cutting edge version. And they have the API out for ChatGPT-4, but not GPT-4 is like the regular API, which means all of the other programs that are all using GPT, they're not as up to date as ChatGPT is. So right now it's the best one, but really soon all of the other software will catch up. Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say. I posted a couple in there. I think Sudowrite is the best one for fiction, especially. It's just they're really on top of things. They added a ton of new features. I put out a couple free tools. I'm still building ghostwriter.com. It's kind of just an entertainment thing right now, but you can have famous historical writers give you feedback and comment on your work. So you can say, what do you think of this chapter? And Hemingway will say, you know, I think this, whatever. That's kind of fun. It sort of works pretty well right now, but once I update it to GPT-4, I think it's going to be annoyingly good. Like it'll be so good that I'll just use it all the time for all of my developmental edits. I'll just, you know, write a quick rough draft and then run it through the software. I don't think there's a one-click total edit, like proofread your entire book yet, but I think there will be a lot of them in the next couple months, which I'm, you know, excited for, because I usually use Grammarly, but I don't like going through and clicking 1,000 times for stupid little things that are just easy to fix. Like, you know, it's a lot of time investment to make that manual human decision when I don't think it's necessary.
Well, we have a good question here that Colin just put in the chat. If my publishing company makes a rule that we will not accept manuscript submissions that have used generative AI, do you think we will stop receiving submissions? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't
I think
think
you
so.
might get more. I don't know.
People like love storytelling and writing, and they're going to do that regardless of whether AI is in the picture or not. And so I think you'll definitely get submissions still. I don't think that would ever stop.
I think to the point that we talked about early on, though, Colin, how are you going to know? How are you actually going to verify that? And, you know, maybe today it's easier to see, but it's the point that I think Derek was making, you know, give it 2 months. I mean, this is something that is evolving so fast right now. And I wanted to come back to Ron's question about what are the best tools. I think even if we came up with, you know, a list or, you know, wrote a book or a blog post on what are the best tools, it will be out of date within a week. I mean, things really are moving that fast. It's astounding how fast it's changing. So,
Yeah,
so you have to just dive in. I think that's the other part. Yeah, we were talking about, okay, you know, $20 a month here, $20 a month there, it adds up. But if you're looking at it in terms of I'm not paying a developmental editor, this is really cheap.
Let's not go with the not paying the developmental editor. You know, I do have to draw the line somewhere.
It's not good.
Just like I would say, don't go with not paying your designer and using templates and things like that. I mean, it is, but it's you know, it's a choice that I think every author, every publisher is going to have to make is how far do you want to go with this? And maybe how cheap are you willing to be? And if you can get away with, you know, not hiring anybody and using AI art templates, AI developmental edits, you know, things like that, and start cranking books out and making money, who am I to tell you not to? Is it going to be as good as if you used a bunch of professionals? Probably not, but you know, it won't take a year either. So.
Yeah, the two big things are, on the one hand, like right now, probably it's not as good as paying a professional, but very soon it will be. So making the choice to use AI just because it's cheaper, not necessarily because you're a cheapskate, but a lot of authors don't have the budget to produce a professional quality book, which means their book will never be successful and their story won't get as much visibility or success. I've always kind of pushed for lowering the barriers to entry, lowering the gatekeepers so that people can just make their book successful without, you know, investing $5,000 to do it right. A lot of people will say, oh, if you can't afford a book cover designer, if you can't afford an editor, you just shouldn't publish. And I think that's ridiculous. But the other thing is what happens when AI is just way better in quality than anybody you could hire at the higher price. And it's no longer a choice of I'm gonna do what I can afford, or I'm gonna hire the cheap thing, but how do I make the best version of my book? I want to use the tools that give me the best quality at any price.
So this came up from Carol Chapman in the chat earlier, and maybe someone can explain this. I don't understand how this works. She said you can create a retrieval augmented generation tool on top of ChatGPT, which essentially ensures that the responses ChatGPT provides are based on the information in the RAG. So how, like I mean, I've used ChatGPT, I understand going to a website, but then how do you layer that tool onto that?
This is essentially what Emilia was talking about. when she was referencing her chatbot. Now, she wasn't using Chat GPT as the large language model, I believe, underneath it. But this is what she was doing and what I've seen other authors do, to be able to basically say, okay, we're going to have this pool of text that you say, like, this book and these specific lines that these characters said, or, you know, these entire series, I only want it to pull from this. And this is actually what all these AI companies technically like built on top of GPT-4. They don't use a RAG, but they're editing the foundational model. It's really complicated right now. It's very, like, I think relatively, like, if you're not like very tech savvy, would take a long time. And even if you are tech savvy, would take hours to set up. The thing is, though, what Carol's mentioning is likely going to be possible. People are already working on building the software so that anyone could do it very simply. In probably the next few months, we're going to see something come live, definitely by the end of the year. So what she's mentioning, and in a very near future, this will be possible. You'll be able to go on a site and you'll be able to type in your book, and it'll basically, like Derek was saying, be able to generate you your second book based off that, or like Emilia was saying, have a chat bot based off that book, only pulling from specific data sets, which would be what you feed it. Right now, I'd say the biggest problem that is just that it's difficult to do. But if people are technical here and want to try it, it can be fun to spin some things up that can be really custom. It can almost be like your personal GPT.
Well, yeah, so there's a site that I use for entertainment called character.ai, and like they have public bots that people have created. So like you could go and talk to Elon Musk and harass him about Twitter or whatever you want to do. And I assume that works the same way, that they like set up his knowledge or whatever.
Yeah, that's it probably does. I've checked out character.ai actually myself. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of really wild to think about all the different possibilities. And I'd encourage people just to continue with, whether you want to use these tools tomorrow or not, you know, continue to pay attention. I don't think it's worth completely ignoring this space at all, because everyone I talk to, and I think everyone here would agree that like this is only the beginning in terms of power and capabilities. Every smart entrepreneur and tech person I know has basically given up their life to build generative AI in the last 3 months. So if you thought what was built now was interesting, in the next 18 months, there's so much more intellectual power behind this. So like I said, it is concerning. There's going to be disruption to this industry in big ways. But instead of like trying to get ahead of it and think about this inevitable future, I encourage people to think about, what future do you want to live? What business do you want to have? How do you want to live your life as a writer? And I think what Derek said was so empowering about maybe some of the things you don't like to do. Like people who are running small presses here, you probably are on meetings a lot, and it's probably like, oh, I have to follow up with this person, and then I have to figure out the notes in the call. Well, there's already AI that exists right now, and I'll put a link in the chat to one that I've used that will take meeting notes for you and is already basically going to send follow-up emails. So like every mundane thing that you're maybe like, like I could do so much more interesting things with my time, I could make my business go so much further, is possible. So don't just limit your view around AI to like creative things. All the other operational things that you don't like in your business is becoming more and more automated. Just talking to a guy today who he runs a marketplace internet company, and he has to spend like, we'll just say a wild amount on lawyers and accountants each year, and he's already using AI to decrease that. I'm good friends with the founder of a company called Creators Legal. I'll also put their link in the chat. They have like right now basically templated contracts that are like really cheap, like $100 a year membership. And he's now going to be building something with AI that customizes those contracts more. So just the ways that you can, again, cut the stress, cut the cost down, and be able to run your business better extends way beyond like the scope of even what we touched on today. So I encourage people to keep their eyes open.
So the other thing that I find myself wondering, like, is the cat already out of the bag here? I mean, is this true open source, or will we get to a point where you can't touch AI without paying heavily into some sort of subscription model?
I think we've seen subscription models from like Jasper and others where there's a free account or a very minimal account and good, better, best. You get 5,000 words a month, 10,000 words a month, 50,000 words a month for different price points. So it's a subscription ongoing based on usage. It's the taxi meter principle. The more words you use, the more words it creates, the more they will charge you.
I actually think it's going to go in the opposite direction where what we have now is you have to pay because only the small new companies that are kind of in between exist right now. Very soon, the very big, large companies, Microsoft and Google, they're probably going to come out with a free open source version like Bing did, basically. Bing was a dying platform. They put out a free AI tool and suddenly they have traffic again to Bing. I think all of the really big companies will use that. So if you already use Google Docs or Microsoft Word, whatever company you're already paying money to, they're going to give you an AI version that you're not going to have to pay extra for because they have to compete against, you know, these very popular new models. Right now, ChatGPT is making tons of money because it exists in this weird void, but the really big companies are very quickly gonna take over and offer something better for less money.
Oh, yeah. And actually, I think college students are going to do this. Stanford recently, there were students at Stanford who in a day basically were able to rip off ChatGPT-4 and have their own version running on their own server. And what I don't mean is like they're just running their own little ChatGPT. They literally built another model that mimicked ChatGPT that then now anyone could go use that open source. So there's people taking AI and just like people rip off creative people's work, they're now ripping off the other AI systems that are built to have their own. So all the hard work that, you know, OpenAI did into building ChatGPT-4, someone else now has their own version that they did in basically 4 hours with $200. And it costed, you know, OpenAI hundreds of millions of dollars to create it. So it's, yeah, I think it's trending towards open source for better or worse.
The really interesting thing is with stock photography, because everybody was wondering, like, will Mid-Journey images be allowed on stock photography sites? And what the majority of stock photography sites have done is just build their own AI tool based on their own model. So I think Adobe came out with a new one based on their own reservoir of images so that they can say legally, like, we didn't train on anybody else's copyrighted work. This is just from our own images. Although all the photographers who submitted those images didn't really know that they were training an AI to replace them. But the question of like whether or not stock photography is going to be used, whether AI images are going to be accepted on stock photography, all of the stock photo sites already have a tool built in that generates images. Also, like Canva already has a tool built in. Microsoft Designer already has a tool built in. So like even with book cover design, people have to buy licensed stock photos to build a good book cover in Photoshop. And if you're trying to avoid AI art, that's kind of going to get impossible when all the stock photos, like, we won't be able to tell what's a real photograph and what isn't. As long as we buy the stock photo, we should be protected in making a book cover design. So there's still a really big argument about like AI in book cover design, but it's going to be impossible to avoid.
Well, the history of the internet has been that freemium models always replace paid models unless you can add something special or gatekeep it in some way. So, I mean, the story of the Stanford thing, that's I'm just laughing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think that I was at a talk the other day where Bill de Blasio, of all people, I think you know, wherever your politics are, it's interesting. I think he's dedicating the next chapter of his life to AI. I went to a talk with him, and I think he brought up a really interesting point around open source, which is, you know, the existential things that we'll see, kind of the bad actor type of things that we can see present is going to be, I think, quite worrisome. But I think there's actually a flip side to that, which is I was hearing earlier this sort of conversation around like review blurbs and, you know, getting this author to say this. And, you know, at the end of the day, like a lot of what we're talking about here is very similar to real estate. Like, you know, where is a valuable space for us to put our attention and dollars into as a consumer. Again, thinking as the reader, we have to put the reader first here. And if book product pages just become a bunch of gobbledygook, you're just going to listen to your friends and trusted people online anyways. So I think ultimately, you know, as a species, we trust other people, we work with other people. So the people who've been able to build communities, the creators, the people on TikTok, the people in indie booksellers in their communities who have strong brands, so people who trust them for book recommendations, they're going to carry weight then. An author's tweet will carry more weight. Then it won't be about getting an author's blurb on the back cover, because sure, that could be faked. It'll be about getting the author to, I don't know, maybe not tweet anymore because Twitter's dying. So we'll find a new platform, or Facebook. You get the point, right? That person actually saying it themselves will have more weight. And people can say, oh, these things are deep fake, but no, like, from that person, people will find that person wherever they are, because people care about other people, and will then get that next, you know, book recommendation from, you name it, best-selling author that people want. So I definitely think that, yes, as we see these sort of AI systems permeate each other and enter in every single application we use, I still think, once again, that people are what matters in all of this. And, you know, as much as it can feel like we want to, you know, jump on the train and this is changing everything, I don't think this is changing the reading experience all that much. And I think that if it doesn't change the reading experience all that much and changing the creation experience, then, you know, it's not going to destroy our industry. It's going to be alive, and I think it's going to thrive. We just have to figure out how to navigate it with the people we care about.
On that note, I kind of want to bring this to a close. Anybody else? What does AI normal look like?
I've got to ask the question, which we're
kind of out of time. We're kind of out of time, Ron. So
come on, it's a really important question, which is, in 15, 20 years, what is a human worth? I mean, David up here has written an entire book on this subject. And I was wondering what you guys think as experts. What's the role? What's the central role of a human in 15 to 20 years?
I wouldn't call myself an expert, by the way. I'm speaking for myself.
I wouldn't call myself a human. No, only kidding. No, I think, you know, search has been the dominant feature of the internet. And right now, if 6 months ago, if you went to Google and said, what is the best digital piano? It will give me links to sites that clever SEO people have figured out how to scam Google. And Google also sells ad space on the top of that search as well. What's going to happen now is I'll go to Bing and say, what is the best digital piano and what should I look for? I'll say, here are the 5 factors you should look for in a digital piano. Make sure it does this, this, and the other thing. Make sure it does that and the other thing, but I'm not going to make any recommendations. Then the next step is, I'll make a recommendation, but is it an honest recommendation, or did Yamaha pay them for that recommendation? Because they're not going to show links to other sites anymore. So the search engines through AI are going to be totally manipulated by the manufacturers. This may not be a publishing question, but I guess you could say, what are the best self-help books for expectant mothers? And it doesn't come up with, you know, what to expect when you're expecting, because someone else paid Bing more money to show up in a article that was written about, you know, that topic.
I think at the end of the day, the worth of humanity, we cannot let degrade. And I think that too often we've let certain people be degraded in our society and maybe never uplifted to begin with. And I think this is an opportunity, as many of us have highlighted, to potentially actually uplift people and to actually highlight and inspire people who never would have been able to get their voices out in the world before. But I also think at a more meta level, when we think about the internet, especially in a COVID world, right? It kind of became our connection. It became like almost everything for us. A lot of us probably spend most of our day on the internet, myself included. But I don't think we need to be defined as humans by zeros and ones. We're made of atoms. And I think that we also, as a species, are in control of how we let AI define our way of being. And I think that if we do this right, It'll be an empowering thing. And that at the end of the day, we cannot, as humans and as storytellers, an industry designed to help us all connect with other people and to literally just try and connect with the world and learn and get inside of someone's head. Like that's what we do when we read fiction. We get inside of another person's mind like nothing else. I can't see how we don't elevate the value of humanity, or at least don't continue maintaining it. And I don't want to put an economic number on that. That's all, you know, that all doesn't matter. Like at our core, humans are worth something. What we create, our views, and that will not be degraded by AI, because I don't think anything can degrade that but our own extinction. So maybe we will go extinct in 20 years, but I'm a little bit more optimistic than that.
Well, you can go back to Ray Kurzweil's predictions like 40 years ago that we'll be able to do a data dump of our brain into a computer, and the computer
That's
will make decisions for us. Even if our bodies die, it can still make decisions and act as if it were us. And the question is it real? Is it a computer? Is the computer the human? Did we give our power to this machine to act on our behalf? I mean, this is science fiction stuff that we're touching.
Watch San Junipero on
Real.
Netflix. It's a Black
I'm sorry,
Mirror.
Michael, go ahead.
Watch San
Everything.
Junipero on Netflix. San Junipero on Netflix. It's a Black Mirror episode, and it's amazing about that. And it makes, I think, everyone cry who watches it. It made me cry, so that probably doesn't count as everyone, but I cried.
Could you put that in the chat, please, so I can?
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's amazing. It's a great show. 1 hour about that.
Cool, thank you. It's been really
All right.
pleasure. Everyone knows something about this. No one knows everything about it. We all have, I know a little bit of this topic and this topic, or this software, that software. There are a lot of new tools to check out there, and I'm excited to dig into the developmental editing program, which is free, thank you, and see what it can do. Because if there's another tool out there that can make us work more effectively, then why not? We didn't have big discussions about Pro Writing Aid or AutoCrit or Grammarly. When those come out, they were just like, hey, this is a great tool. We can decide to use it or part of it and help us to improve our writing. In some ways, AI may be exactly the same. And maybe, similar to what podcasting was 3 years ago. It's like everyone's podcasting, and podcasting is great. Now it's like, it's just part of the vernacular now. It's just what we do.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you, panelists, for coming this evening.